Welcome, everyone. I see some people are still kind of joining the room, so that's no problem. I'm just going to do a quick introduction while we have everyone jump into the room. So my name is Brittany, and I am thrilled to be part of this webinar with Brett today. We are going to talk about a topic that is so important, and it has such a strong impact on small to large organizations. What we're finding is recruiting continues to be an ongoing challenge for many organizations. So we're really excited to share with you today about our best practices on how to recruit smarter, not harder. So just a quick little introduction on who we are. So Brett is going to be leading the webinar today. He is the VP of recruiting at HR Covered. He's had incredible success placing top applicants in many different industries, from non-for-profit to professional services to very niche industries and positions across Canada. And myself, I partner with HR Covered and Brett's team as a recruiter as well. I work a lot on mid-management to upper management positions. I do a lot of sales and service positions. And collectively, our team just loves what we do, and we're great at it. And we are thrilled to share some of our secrets with you today. So what to expect? Brett's presentation is going to be about 20-30 minutes in length. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a Q&A at the end to answer any of your questions. So you should see on the screen, there is a Q&A box at the bottom there, right beside raise your hand. So feel free to put in any questions. And when the webinar is done, we will go through those questions and make sure they get answered for you. So I hope you enjoy this webinar. I hope you take away some value from it. And I am going to pass it over to you, Brett, to get started.
Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate it. So screen shared here. I have my screen on this side, so I'm not checking my Facebook account. I'm actually just looking at the presentation. So very excited to get going. Quickly, our agenda for today, quickly about our story. We're going to talk about why hiring is so difficult, 6 tips to recruit smarter, rating talent, how we recruit here at HR Covered, and then a Q&A with Brittany and myself. So we're going to jump right into it. Oh, and of course, the goal is really, it doesn't matter if you're going to use us to recruit, if you're going to use a different recruiting company, or if you're going to do hiring on your own. My hope is that we can provide some value from our experiences so you can hire smarter, not harder, and make recruiting much more enjoyable way to make your organization rock and roll. So let's jump into it quickly. HR Covered, we were founded in 2022. We're a national HR company, including operating in Quebec and in French. There's really 4 key things that we do: human resources, health and safety, employment law, and recruiting. And we're going to be talking about recruiting today. So basically, a lot of people ask, why do we recruit? How do we get into recruiting? And what I find really interesting is that as an HR company, we really got into recruiting because our clients asked us for that. So we don't so much recruit outside of our clientele. And then here are just some quotes from some of our clients with, being very happy with our work. So we recognize the need. Our clients, were really happy with the HR service that we were providing and the legal support and health and safety. But we kept hearing, hey, I need help with recruiting. And that really does fall in the ecosystem of HR support and what we do to HR Covered. So that's why we got into recruiting. We love recruiting. We do a really good job at it. And I'm very proud to say that I think we really, take everyone into account. We're a people-first organization. The client and the prospects mean a lot to us, and we really try to approach it with a human touch. So why, I just threw my pen, why is hiring so difficult? Complicated issue, right? And obviously it's more than 3 things, but I just wanted to touch on these 3 aspects right now, just to put things into context a bit. Global community, the radical shift, and the great resignation. Some of those terms, probably the great resignation you've heard of before. So technology versus geography, the global community. What does that mean? Before COVID, geography really dictated everything. If you were recruiting for a job in Toronto, chances are you were looking for people in the greater Toronto area. COVID comes along, people have to work remote, everything gets shifted. Zoom becomes the norm, and now pretty much everyone is used to meeting on video. And what that's done is now geography does not overpower technology. Technology is what dominates. And that means that for a lot of jobs, especially white collar jobs, you can be really anywhere to get the job done for the most part. And that's really changed things. So it's great in many respects, because now you have this huge pool of applicants if you're able to offer a job that's remote or, very heavily favored to being hybrid. But it also means that you're competing with companies from across the world now. So you're not just fixed into your geography and competing against other people within that area. You're really competing against people from all across Canada, from the United States and other countries. The second factor is called the radical shift. And this is a result of COVID, and this is the result of technology taking over geography. And it's especially true for A players. And we'll get into that, what an A player is in a second. But basically 88% of knowledge workers want complete flexibility in their hours and location. Right now at HR Covered, that's how we've built and scaled our company and attracted really great people, is that we're fully remote. So it doesn't matter if you want to work from the cottage or Vancouver Island or Halifax or somewhere in between, as long as you get the work done and you're a good person and you love what you do, that's a great fit for us. And so this is a really important factor. And again, it's not relevant if you're working in manufacturing, in a factory, obviously. But if you're in a blue collar or a white collar job, and you're really good at what you do, you now have the power to dictate the terms in terms of like where you're going to work and how you're going to work. The Great Resignation, a term that was really popular during COVID. This is a survey, a couple years old now, but it's still very relevant. 2001, 53% of Canadian organizations reported employee turnover at an all-time high. And then on top of that, 40% of Canadians said they were open to exploring new opportunities. So Brittany and I and Angela, we love to hear this at HR Covered for recruiting, because it means that if we have the right job and we go after the right people through headhunting, there's a 40% chance that they're going to engage with us to at least learn more about the job opportunity. May not be the right fit, but that engagement, and that approach is really what allows us to find great candidates and ultimately to headhunt them or poach them from another organization. So people are open to new opportunities now. And that's something that's great for recruiting, but it makes it hard if you're an employer. So there's really 6 key reasons why people, have left their jobs or are open to finding new jobs. They're burned out, poor culture, no flexibility, lack of meaning, no prospect to grow, and compensation. We often think, oh, it's all about money. It's not all about money. I will say that in the last 6 months, money's come back into play more because of inflation, just because life is more expensive than it was a year ago. But these factors, it's often 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 that, motivates a person to look for a new opportunity or to consider going down a different direction. So we want to address those things in order to retain talent, which isn't this talk, but to have an offer that is really enticing, so we can land the best talent and use our brain and not work overly hard and waste valuable resources. So let's get into the tips, right? There's really 6 key tips here. Again, these are pretty broad strokes. This is from our experience at HR Covered with recruiting. So we're going to talk about having a recruiting plan, understanding compensation, being flexible in your approach, how to sell your offer, how to act with urgency, and why you should never judge a book by its cover. So we're going to jump into that. Number 1, have a recruiting plan. Sounds simple, right? But there's really kind of 2 ways of looking at it. Most people, when they approach hiring, and then, to hire, you then engage in recruiting to find people to fill those positions. It's a reactive measure. So what that basically means is you have a job, and then all of a sudden Bob has just quit out of nowhere. And you thought Bob was there for at least like 5 more years, and you're not prepared for it. So now you're reacting. You're like, oh, we're in trouble. We just lost our VP of operations. What are we going to do? So now you're scrambling, and you don't have a plan on how you're going to replace them. Now, you're never going to know if someone's going to leave or not, but the whole point is you want to be proactive when you look at hiring. So an easy solution is to have a relationship with a recruiting company. Could be us, could be somebody else. But we often will have return clients that we've recruited for before we've recruited for, it's a tongue twister, recruited for before. And they've come back and said, hey, you know what? I now have a new need. I actually got an email yesterday from a client in British Columbia saying that we have 2 positions that we want to fill. It's a relocation. How can we approach this? So we're going to jump on a call and talk about it. But that's about having a proactive recruiting plan. So when someone leaves, great, you have a relationship with a recruiter. If you're not using a recruiter, then it's about having a process in place, knowing that, okay, we need a job description, obviously. We need an employment contract, which those things you need even if you're using a recruiter. And who's going to handle it? How are we going to go about doing it? Are we going to be posting? Are we going to be trying to do headhunting? Those types of things. So having a plan is always a good thing, right? And I always joke, you got to operate like a military operation, right? If you don't have a plan going into battle, you're going to get smoked. It's the same thing with recruiting and hiring. You have to have a plan. Could be with a recruiter, could be on your own, but have a plan. Number 2, you need to understand compensation. This is a big one, again, coming back to the salary and with inflation. We always recommend, number 1, post a job with a salary range, and never offer less than what you've posted in that salary range. And the reason being is that you don't want to waste anyone's time. You don't want to waste your time as a recruiter, and you don't want to waste people's time who are interested. So when you don't post a salary range, you might have someone apply that's perfect, but if they're 20, 30,000 over asking, it's not a good use of resources. On top of that, a lot of organizations, and we do a ton of work with not-for-profits, their budgets are tight. And even in the for-profit industry right now, budgets are tight. And the salary is often what it is, right? Like there's not a lot of flexibility in some circumstances. So you need to really look at other things, especially vacation, AKA time, as a way to make your compensation offer better. We've had clients, and we'll get into the negotiation part, where I think of this one tech company. I found an amazing person. She had just sold her business. I had a non-compete clause as an accountant, and wanted this job as a controller. And she was fine with the salary. She's like, I just made lots of money. I want something to do, for the next couple of years. I want to help, a startup. And she negotiated 7 weeks of vacation and the ability to go work in Argentina a couple months of the year. Which is relatively the same time zone, I believe. I think it's off one hour from Ontario. So that's an example of being able to offer time as a way to offset compensation, because that really wasn't about money. The person wanted more time. Benefits, health, dental, all these things really matter. So if you can build that in, and obviously that's a cost to the employer, that makes the job more attractive. Plus, you can offer things like bonuses, performance bonuses. There's many different ways to approach it, but having an incentive is never a bad thing. It works for my kids. It works for my dog. It can work for trying to find great talent. Being flexible in your approach. This is a really big one. So you have office, or on location, hybrid, and remote. Now, not every job can be remote. Not every job can be hybrid. Right now, technology is changing those things. Now you can have a surgeon doing a surgery in Toronto and operating on someone through technology, and that machine's doing this, the actual detail work in some far off country. But for the most part, some jobs are going to have to be in office, but a lot of jobs can be remote. A lot can. And what we often see is that it's being stuck to this old paradigm where it's like, well, I have an office and I'm the owner and I want to see people in the office for sure. I get it. There's a lot to be said about that in terms of, being able to have a quick meeting and to see people. But for a lot of situations, building in that flexibility is going to allow you to attract better talent, especially from your competition, if they're not as flexible. So being more flexible, especially when you think about your competition, is going to give you the upper hand. And you can incorporate things like flexible start times, loo time, things that, mean a lot and say something on that job posting because once someone gets in a position, they do a great job, things can change and become more flexible. But when you put your offer out there, having things that show that you're a flexible organization, that you respect people's time, because if Mary has to drop off her kids at 8:30 and can't start until 9:30, but she's going to do a great job, is it really worth not considering her for the position if that flexibility makes sense for that role? Number 4, Tinder effect. So this is always a favorite. So what does this mean? Right? Well, if you're trying to fill a position, right, you're essentially marketing your organization, and it doesn't matter, not for profit, for profit, whatnot. You got to sell your organization. So I always say, if you were single and you were using a dating app, and I use Tinder because Tinder is a pretty famous example, are you going to use a picture of yourself in track pants, sitting on the couch with a bowl of chips in front of you and stained orange juice on your top and your hair all disheveled? No, you're not, right? Because no one is going to swipe right? Because you look like, why would anyone swipe right? Essentially, without getting into the nitty gritties. No, what you're going to do is you're going to find the best picture in your role of the time you were in Mexico on the beach and it was a sunset. And you're going to say that, I like music and, I do yoga, even though you haven't done yoga for 4 months, and I like to walk. You're going to sell yourself in the best way possible, even though it may not all be true. It's within the realm of truth. It's the same thing with selling your organization. Right? Don't make your job postings sound like prison sentences, because we see it all the time. Really sell the culture, sell why this is a great opportunity. I have a client right now, small not-for-profit. There's 2 people. They just lost their 1 employee for 11 years. And really with that job, I'm trying to find the right fit for them based on personality. And, at the end of the day, and I'll talk about this later, but it's really about matchmaking in many ways. So the analogy is actually pretty strong. When you're trying to recruit and find that right fit, you're really matchmaking. So in order to do that, you really got to sell your offer. You got to market who you are and celebrate who you are. Number 5, this is a big one. And I'm actually shocked that it's still that relevant, but you need to act with urgency. So number 1, when when we set out as recruiters, we always set the timelines with our client and with the prospect, so they know, okay, here's the timeline, right? Approximately, things can change, and here's what to expect. Right. And the same thing is when that final interview happens with our client and the 2 or 3 people they're interviewing at the end of the recruiting cycle, we highly recommend that you're in a position to make an offer within 48 hours. We see great people, we lose them during the recruiting process because they're interviewing for other jobs and they get snagged. So it's important that we move as quickly as possible, but at the same time, do the job. And as an employer, you need to be in a position to make a decision quickly. And that comes back to having a recruiting plan, knowing what you want. And when that person's there and you're picking between 3 of them, okay, this is who we want to go with, let's move. And if it's not the right person, then that's okay, right? You can, we can always reset, do another round of recruiting if needed. But if it's the right person, move on them because you could lose them. We see it all the time. It's heartbreaking, but it happens. Number 6, never judge a book by its cover, reading in between the lines. I always love when we do a round of recruiting and I hand over 3 people and the client calls me up and they're like, you know what? I just don't think 2 of these people are worth my time. I'm not going to interview them. I'm only going to do 1 interview. Can you go find me someone else? And then I will say, look, I get what you're saying, but we've gone through our process. We've done all of our work and we really think that this person is worth your time. They do the interview in the end, not all the time, but usually they do. And often it's the person they never thought they were going to hire that they hire. And I always love that because they'll call back and be like, that was the most, enjoyable process ever because we hired someone that we never even would have invited for an interview. Meanwhile, this person just did 3 interviews. So a resume is one component. It's a way for screening. I think the average recruiter looks at a resume a total of 7 seconds. But, you know, depending on the file, again, you can't just judge it by the resume. I mean, if it's like horrible spelling and horrible formatting and it's a job that's about attention to detail, okay, like for sure, the resume matters. But the point is that especially when you're using a recruiter like us, or if you're doing it internally, go through the process and, you know, don't make a decision until you've gone through it all. And when we pass those people over to the client, you know, we really recommend, hey, do the interview. You like, you know, like we've put in all this time, we've gone through this process. We're really excited, but you know, with these 3 people, at the end of the day, you're trying to hire 1 person, right? So 2 people are not going to get the job, even if they're great. Do the interview. Never judge a book by its cover. It's a really big one, and yeah, I mean, I just think that it's something that we can all learn from. There's all this talk these days about, you know, being inclusive and, you know, not having biases and whatnot. It's the same thing with a resume. Dig a little deeper, talk to the person, get to know who they are, because you never know who that person is. Yeah. So anyways, those are the 6 tips. So our recruiting process. So basically, like I love telling clients at the end of the day, you know, as recruiters, we're really matchmakers, right? We're trying to find, not only are we trying to fill a position, we're trying to find a really great A player for you, but it's just as important that we find a good fit for the prospect. So it has to be a win-win, right? So that's what we do. You know, we're matchmakers, and we matchmake by doing headhunting and job posting. So job postings, nothing that you can't already do. You know, we put marketing money behind it. We post a job. We try to format it in a way that makes sense. But really what we specialize in and what we're great at is headhunting. And for that, we'll build email lists build based on the profile of person that we're going after. We'll also do direct outreach on different job boards to people to engage in conversation. Because remember, 40% of Canadians are open to exploring new opportunities. So headhunting is a huge, I mean, it's the way to go when you're trying to fill a position. I don't quite know what the stats are officially. I think it's around 60% of our jobs that we fill, if I'm correct, are through headhunting versus posting. And especially the more, you know, the more senior the job, the higher that percentage goes. So we'll sometimes do jobs for clients that we don't even post the job. They don't even want it posted. And, you know, we only do direct outreach for those, you know, more senior director, VP type roles. The further down the food chain, job postings do matter, but I always say, like, posting a job on a job board is like going fishing. You got to hope that the fish go by at the right time and that they're hungry, right? And so it's a lot of luck. You can post a job, get no action or good action, post that same job a month later and get 10 really great people applying. You just don't know. But with headhunting, you go after who you want. So you're being very specific and you're being very efficient. And that's how you recruit smarter, not harder, ultimately. So why would someone use our recruiting process? Basically, organizations that, you know, just don't have the bandwidth and they're like, you know what, we would rather you do it. We don't have the time. Especially true for smaller organizations, not-for-profits, for-profits, where, you know, this falls on the owner or someone very senior and they just don't have the time. Like, they can do it. Like, it's not rocket science what we do, but it's a grind, and we have a team of people working on a file. So, you know, for a senior leader to commit all this time to doing recruiting, is that really what you want to be doing? Or do you want to be focusing on growing and running your business? We also get a lot of clients that have tried to hire in the past. They either made hires that were disasters. Arguably, hiring the wrong person is worse than not filling a role. Or they just weren't able to fill the position in general. And they're like, you know what, we've tried for 3 months. We cannot find anyone. Please help us. And then, of course, there are clients that, you know, just are like, we want expert advice. We want an expert process. Just go out there and do it. And that's kind of tied to bandwidth management, but it's just more for those clients that know, hey, especially return clients, you guys do a great job. Just go out there and do your job and let us know when you find someone. So in our recruiting process, you know, it doesn't matter what the job is. Our goal is always to hand over 1 to 3 A player candidates to the client at the end of our recruiting cycle. It depends on the job. Again, it comes down to geography, the flexibility, the compensation. Sometimes a client might be like, hey, I want to see the top 5 people. And maybe, you know, we have 2 really great A players and 3 B+ players. And we'll say, okay, here are the 2 A's, here are 3 B+, interview them, see what you think, and make a decision. But our goal is 1 to 3 A players after a round of recruiting. Because again, the goal is to come back to the client, having done all the hard work, all the grinding, so they can literally do that interview, evaluate, talk amongst themselves, make that decision within 48 hours, and have this position filled. So our cycle, it's really a 9-step process. So we do the onboarding call with the client, we do the preparation, like get the job posting ready, all of our marketing materials, we launch it. As applications come in, we sort them and rank them. Then we invite people for a first interview. If they pass that, we invite them to a second interview. If they pass that, we hand them over to the client for a final interview, which sometimes could be 1 or 2 interviews. And then if they want to make an offer, we can do background checks, and we can also help with negotiations and the offer. So grading talent, we're almost done there. I like this. So I always say, you know, if you're getting on an airplane, if you're having surgery, if you're getting a home renovation, do you want someone who's great or do you want someone who's okay? Right. And that's why we want to think of A players. So this is what we specialize in. It's not just about filling a position. It's about finding someone who's great. And it doesn't matter if you're an office administrator or a CFO, right? Or anywhere in between. An A player is the top 10% of available talent for any given position in any given industry. A B player is 65 to 90% of talent. So, you know, if you're 80 to 90, you might be able to become an A player. If you're below that, maybe you're destined to be a C player. C players, I have a garbage can there. Like, you do not want them. Let your competition hire them. So our focus is finding the top 10% of available talent, finding you someone like that to get them in your organization. I just added this in this morning because I had a client email me and basically just said, hey, I haven't, you know, like they have an interview on Monday with 3 people. Can you send me a bunch of questions? And my response was, sure, I can send you questions. But instead of that, I would first think of it as, you know, the interview and how it's laid out. So when we do an interview, the first part is personal discovery. The second part is work experience. And the third part is the job requirement. And I'm not even joking. We did an interview this week, and so we try to talk about anything but the job at the beginning, right? So what do you do for fun? Like, if it was the weekend, what type of hobbies do you do? Like, those types of things. And the person's like, I don't know why you're asking me this. And it was like, okay, that's exactly why we asked this, because this job requires you to be outgoing and you don't even want to tell me about what you do for fun. Personal discovery is really important. We want to understand the person, and we want to understand, especially if, like, depending on the job, it might be very, very relevant. It may not be, but let's understand the person. It helps the prospect drop their guard a bit and feel more comfortable. Keep in mind that when most people go into an interview, they're really, really scared, right? They're super nervous. They don't know what to expect. They don't know if the person's going to be mean or yelling at them. Again, we really try to make the interviews fun. A lot of people that come out of our interviews will send us a message, or at the end, they'll be like, that was the best interview I was ever a part of. So the personal discovery is important. Work experience, that's talking about asking questions about what they have done in the past, what they are currently doing. And then, of course, job requirements is asking them specific questions or scenarios based on the job that you're hiring for. So, if you're, again, a CFO, you're going to be asking financial questions related to the job, maybe for that controller that you're hiring for. I just wanted to throw that in there because those are kind of like my last minute tips for how to set up an interview by basing it on that. So our recruiting process, how it works is, comes with a 90-day guarantee when we get someone hired for you. It's a $2,000 upfront fee. This covers marketing and administration costs, and then a 20% commission once the job is filled. However, we're offering a webinar promo for you watching today. Thanks for giving us your valuable time. We're offering a 50% discount, a 50% discount. So instead of paying 20% commission, it's 10% commission. I like to use 100,000 because math is easier that way. So if that was 100,000 salary, instead of paying $20,000 in a commission, it's 10,000. If it was a $50,000 job, right, you're talking $5,000 commission. So this offer is only available if you reply to the email that we're going to send out after this call. And all you got to do is reply, and then you can book a call, talk with Brittany, myself, or Angela before the end of the day, Friday. Otherwise, our offer will be expired. And if you take advantage of this, even if you decide to use it later on this year, if you use this service and you want to hire for multiple jobs, you're going to be locked into this price for the rest of 2023. So that's that. And now we're on to the Q&A. So I'm going to close this up and I'm going to pass it back to Brittany. Where's my close window here? How do I share? Stop sharing. Okay, Britt, back to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Brett. So we got a handful of good questions have come in. So I'm going to start with the first one. Just out of curiosity, we have Julianne who's wondering what percentage of jobs are you filling that come from headhunting versus applications coming in through postings?
Sure. So I briefly touched on that. On average, it's around 60%. The more senior the job, the higher it is. More entry-level jobs, it's closer to 50-50.
Okay, perfect. One thing that I'll mention with that too is that I always like to remind people that because we're seeing such a shift where historically we used to be able to put something on Indeed or LinkedIn and be able to get tons of qualified applicants and be able to hire very easily. And there's such a shift now where a lot of the times we are having to do more headhunting efforts to be able to get those jobs in front of the right applicants' faces, to be able to get more people to think outside of the box of, do I want something more? Am I happy where I am? Making sure that before you start recruiting for a position, you are in a position to be able to dedicate your time to headhunting. So it's a key aspect in being successful with hiring. So if that is yourself or someone on your team or utilizing another resource like HR Covered, making sure that's something you have part of your plan. When we talk about making sure you have your recruitment plan, making sure you have allocated the right resources to be able to have that time available to them to invest in headhunting.
True.
All right, next question we have here from Julia is, on top of the resume, is there anything else that you look for before recommending the person for an interview? So for an example, are you looking for a cover letter, the candidate to post their social media sites, anything in particular you're looking for in a resume?
Well, I'll let you answer that one since you're an expert in all
that. Docket. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's a great question, Julia. So I think that part of our process is we do things a little bit different than the traditional way. So I think that historically, a lot of emphasis would be put on resumes, where more or less what we do is prior to the resumes coming in, we're setting what our qualifications are, what our standards are, what we're looking for in this role on a resume. So it does change depending on the position. So for an example, if we're looking at more a sales related position, we might be looking for something like more KPIs or data driven information provided within a resume, where we might not be looking for that so much in a service role. So dependent on the job, there's certain factors that would be looking for in a resume. When it comes to the basics, to answer your question more specifically, at the top of a resume, we look for certain factors such as cover letter or their social media sites. Those are things that are specific, usually part of our process. So social media sites might be something that we look into once we get to the end of the process of our final applicants. Cover letters. I see you have another question here asking about cover letters and if that's something that's a thing of the past. That kind of ties into this. So cover letters is something that we don't really focus. I think you would agree, Brett, our team much on cover letters anymore. It's more focusing on just resumes. Sometimes we do have companies that do request it because they like it, and we will always be customizable and work with different companies around what their needs are, but it's not something that is part of our practice. So we follow a process called top grading. It's a form of doing recruiting, and that is not a requirement in the process to be able to help us identify A players. So I think it is kind of a little bit more of a thing of the past, and it's not something part of our recruitment process.
And I'll just add to the whole cover letter thing. As a recruiter, there's nothing worse than seeing a generic cover letter. It does the opposite, because it's like, don't send me a generic, like, dear hiring manager, and it has nothing to do with the job. If someone's gonna write a cover letter, it better be made out to the organization and explain why they're a good fit. Otherwise, to me, it's just like, there's no street smarts with that. And so when a client does ask, I have a client right now that wants cover letters. And I'll just, like, quick little story with that. They wanted to have that on the posting at the very beginning, and no one applied in the first like 4 days. So I was like, okay, I get you want a cover letter. Let's get rid of that requirement. But if people pass the first interview, then we'll ask them to write a cover letter. And that has a much higher success rate. And it's more specific, because now we're dealing with people that, you know, are actually interested in the job. We think they might be a good fit. And at that point, you can ask for a cover letter, or it could be a test. It might be an Excel test that you have to do, yada, yada, yada. So it all depends on the thing, but the resume, it's about keeping it simple. It's about looking at the information, like Britt said, and following the top grading process.
Perfect. I have another question here about resumes, and wanting to know, Brett, if you feel that there is any red flags to look for on resume when doing resume sorting.
Well, I like, obviously bad formatting. So looks matter, right? Like, just think about people, right? They're so used to just swiping through their phone, be it on any social media platform. Our attention is so short these days. So if a resume looks horrendous and they've packed 2 pages of information on 1 page, unless I'm like really desperate in that job and I'm like, okay, like, we're not getting good people, I really don't like this resume. So I just try to look for resumes that are appealing, that have the right information, and that you can tell the person, has some formatting to them. It's especially true for jobs where there's a strong attention to detail, or you're going to be writing, dealing with customers. I hate seeing really bad, junky resumes. I also don't like seeing resumes that are just like so out there. They got my attention, but it's just a little too much. I'll still look at it, and I might even ask the person, be like, hey, I'm glad we did the interview. I think you have great potential, but can you change your resume? Because I don't want to hand this over to the client.
I think also, to add on that, transparency is something that's really big that we look for. So if an applicant is providing a resume where they're not being fully transparent, so maybe they're not showing the dates on their resume of when they work somewhere, or the years they were somewhere, or if they graduated from a program or they just went to that university. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad if they were there for a short amount of time or they didn't graduate, but not having that transparency can sometimes come across as they are hiding something. That's something that I know that I always look for, is making sure that the information is very easily available for me to be able to see.
Well, I'll just add quickly, I really love on resumes when they have an executive summary that just explains who they are. Absolutely. I've had lots of jobs where there's been like gaps in employment, very common with COVID. And, again, depending on the job, you might be like, this person has great experience, but why haven't they worked for 3 years? And then you reach out to them and they're like, oh, I had to go take care of my kids because of this, or I was taking care of a loved one. I'm like, hey, that's great that you did that, but have a line or two that explains why there are gaps, who you are, why you had to do something. And I think that goes a long way, because we're going through so many different things. When you can explain something concisely, it helps us understand who the person is.
Absolutely. All right, we have another question here that has come through. And it is, do you specialize and there's two jobs here. Do you specialize in any particular job type or industry type? And the second part to that would be, they are looking for a policy analyst manager position. And do we have any experience filling these roles?
So the first part, in terms of do we specialize in anything? What we specialize in is recruiting for our clients. So if our client has a job that we feel that we can take on, we'll take it on. There are a few examples, like, if it's like, we don't get into healthcare so much, and education, blue collar hourly jobs are really difficult for our process. But we recruit for our clients. The second part of the question, I'll hand back to you, like in terms of the specifics of the analysis and manager, Britt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason Brett did that is because I tend to have a lot of the analysts positions. So personally, I've done a lot of research analyst and manager positions. I've done data analysts and manager positions, sales analysts and manager positions. Policy, we haven't necessarily got into that specifically. A lot of times that might fall under healthcare, but just depending, we have done more policy analyst writer positions. So it just depends in particular what you're looking for. But like Brett mentioned, our process that we have developed for recruiting is designed to work for any position, to be able to help wean out the B players and be able to identify the A players. So it is a methodology that is able to work for different industries in different positions. But yes, we all kind of have our own little niches, I'd say, where we have certain jobs now that we have a lot of. And so if we do get a job that isn't a certain industry or a certain position, we can all be successful in that, but sometimes now we will, because we have done so many, pass that on to the recruiter that does have a lot of experience in that area. So an analyst position would probably be more in my realm. So that would be something that absolutely I'm comfortable doing. So hopefully we answered your question there. If we didn't, feel free to add another. So we have another question here about nowadays, this kind of jumps into when we were talking about Brett about the gaps in the resume. So Judith has a question. Nowadays, jumping jobs is common, but how much should the person be in a job on average?
Good question. I think it depends on the job for the most part, but because I mean, as a headhunter, I don't really want to go after someone who's been in a job for less than a year, typically. If someone's been in a job for like 10 years, I'm probably not going to go there because they must love it. I still might reach out. So yeah, I would say, you're looking for trends and patterns that are positive. So, I would say at least a year in a position, or maybe they've been in a position for 10 months and before that they were in a role for 5 years. So you're just trying to make sure that there's some stability in the overall view, but every case is different. Every job is different. If it's a very, very difficult file and there's, it's in office, it's in a small market, we're going to look at things that we may otherwise not look at if it's coming out of Toronto, as an example. So I didn't really answer your question. I would say it's on a case-by-case basis, but we're looking more for patterns and consistency over a long trend.
Another thing I can add to that hopefully will be value to you, Judith, is that when you do see jumping around in jobs, like Brett mentioned, a lot of times you'll see it more in certain industries or positions. I always like to find out, really dig into why they left. So understanding if it's a contract, a full-time, and what was the reason. So did they leave on their terms, or were they dismissed, or were they laid off? Was it a contract? And one thing that I always look for is when someone leaves a job, what is their reasoning for it? And I like them to have the accountability on themselves for the reason in leaving, not being disgruntled with the company or the employer, because sometimes you'll come across these situations and you'll see a lot of jump, and they're always blaming their boss or the business that they worked for on why it wasn't a good fit, not necessarily because they're a top player and they weren't challenged enough and they needed more, they're hitting all their goals. And so that's something that I always look for, is the reason why they were leaving, because sometimes that can be a little bit of an indication that they might be poisonous in the work environment. They might be a little bit of a disgruntled employee if they're never happy and they're always pointing fingers of why they're not happy.
That's a good point. There was one question before we skipped. What do you do to get a solid understanding of the job and the organization? So Britt, can you answer that one as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of our process, the first thing that we do, so when we do get a new position that we're going to work with, is we have an onboarding call. So we set up a call with who would be in charge of that position at the organization. Sometimes the onboarding calls with one individual, sometimes there's a few, and we spend about an hour trying to do our best to become an expert as much as possible about your organization and about the position. So we have a process that we go through. We're asking a ton of questions, and our goal is to be able to profile the individual. So we want to almost be able to close our eyes and picture what this individual would be like, what their personality be like, what their skill sets would be like. We can picture them in a day-to-day. We can picture your facility, what it feels like to be able to walk into work every day or start work every day if it's virtual. So we're trying to be able to get as good as the understanding as we can to be able to help fit those applicants. So this is probably one of the most important steps in our process, is having that onboarding call to truly understand your organization, this position, because that helps us build our headhunting campaign around that profile. And it also helps us be able to profile applicants and make sure that the fit is there on their end of what they're looking for as much as your end. I missed anything there, Brett? You think that's a good understanding? No, okay, perfect. Let's see here. Okay, next question. So I'm just checking in our time here. Okay. Is it becoming common to add a photo to a resume? Is this a new practice?
Seems to be, but it's not. It's not like every resume, but you definitely see it more. It's never dictated really anything, and it's hard to do it in a I would say a tasteful way that doesn't make it seem awkward. If you're applying, again, if you're a model and you're applying for a job, yeah, that makes sense. If you're a data analysis, person, and you're sending me a resume with your picture on it, it's like, well, why? It has nothing to do with the job. So it's definitely more common. I don't recommend it. I don't know what you have to say about that, Britt.
I'm impartial, to be honest. So I think that I see it a lot more. It's kind of, if I get one with a picture, it doesn't do any positive. It doesn't do any negative to me. It's just something that we're seeing more. And to me, I think personally, it doesn't affect anything, but I think it probably depends on who's hiring or recruiting and what their thoughts are on that. It's probably a personal thing. And what about when it comes to your thoughts, Brett, on performing reference checks?
Well, there's no harm in doing them, but as everyone knows, the employee or the prospect is providing 3 people. So it's tricky, because if it's a headhunting job, like, they're not going to provide their current employer, right? Unless their current employer knows, and this does happen, that, they want to move on, they want a new opportunity. That might be 10% of the time. So it's very hard. I think what's more important than a reference check is doing the top grading interview that we follow, going back into, when I talked about how the first part of an interview is about personal discovery. To me, that's more important than doing a reference check, because we're going to uncover things about the person without them realizing that we're uncovering who they really are. And then on top of that, we can do a criminal background check, social media check if the client wants that. That's good. I mean, we have had examples. One crazy example where it was a job working with children. We had someone apply. we did some searching on our end and we found out that they were a sex offender, right? And now we would have found that throughout the process, but we found that on our own. So it is important to do your due diligence, but that would not have come up in a reference check. That would come up in a police check. That would come up in doing a Google search or a social media check. So validating, you know, who you're passing over matters, but reference checks, you know, I would say now for me, my clients, maybe only 20% of the time actually ask for them.
And there's some different best practices that we are seeing or that we are doing besides just doing reference checks that I think are coming more popular. For an example, it's an internal recruiting reference check for certain types of positions. So for an example, one thing that I do as a check on my applicants is their communication and their response rate. So I'm very active in communicating with my applicants throughout the process, because to me, that's my internal check on them to see what their response rate is, how quick they respond, what their communication is like with me, because that's going to help me in another way be able to evaluate them. And what was the other thing that I was going to say on reference check? Oh, this is not necessarily relevant for a reference check, but something that it made me think of is that something that has been successful that we've done a few times is having an employee ambassador be involved in the process. So if you are hiring for a certain position, especially if you are headhunting people and you're trying to get them excited about your organization, you can also have someone else who's involved in your company, who's in a similar position to them, have a call with them. And it's an opportunity for this applicant to be able to talk to someone who works there, who's in that department, ask them any questions they want about the position, about the company, why they love working for that company. It helps with buy-in for the applicant that you are trying to headhunt, but then also it's kind of like a peer reference check. So it's someone who's able to look at this applicant through different lenses and have a different type of conversation and give you some feedback. So that's something else to be able to think about, is that some things are changing a little bit and how we are reviewing applicants, and just two things that made me think of that I wanted to share that weren't necessarily to answer your question, but I thought might be some value for you. Okay, we got a few more here before we finish up. I know we got 7 minutes and questions are still coming in. So what are your best tips and tricks, Brett, to staying organizing when you're interviewing 10 candidates back to back?
Well, number one, don't do it on your own. Right? 2 people in an interview, always. So you can take turns taking notes. So be like, okay, I'm going to ask part A, you're going to do part B, I'm going to do part C. Take turns taking notes, or one person could be the interviewer, one person could take notes. But follow the top grade method. I mean, it's the same thing if a police officer is doing an interview and the lawyer's in the room, right? Have 2 people there. And then that way after you can say, because you're going to, it's exhausting doing a bunch of interviews. 10 in a day would be a lot. I would say, maybe, 4 or 5, depending on how long they are. Let's assume they're an hour. 4 interviews in one day would be quite a bit, because you want to have a half-hour break in between your next one in case it goes longer. But then you can say, hey, Britt, like, what did you think? Right? Oh, I think that person was fantastic, but I was concerned about this. Oh yeah, I didn't really think about that. That's a good point. 2 people is way better than 1. So that's the main thing that I would say. That's how you stay organized. You're going to have your thoughts. And if you're doing it virtually, you can record it. And if you're not doing it virtually, you're going to, just take notes, and you're going to have the advantage of just kind of getting to know the person, feeling that energy. Did they give a good handshake? Were they on time? Did they have too much cologne on? All those different types of factors.
Okay. And just to follow up on reference checks, we have a question here wondering if it's better to do a phone call reference check or send the questions in writing. I can answer that one if you'd like. I personally always like to do the phone call, because I think that it's better always to have dialogue. It's the same thing as if you were someone on your team you're giving feedback to. Things could come across differently in writing. You also want to see how people respond. Sometimes there is a secondary question that's necessary. So I think it's always better to be able to do a reference check over the phone, because you can really hear it through someone's voice a lot of times, and a little bit more than what they're just saying. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
That's a good point. And just to add to that, I always, if I'm doing a reference check, they've given me the phone number. I will often, and same thing when I'm engaging with prospects, I will save their number in my phone with the job, and I'll text them. And I'll say, hey, it's Brett from HR Covered. I'm reaching out to do a reference check on so-and-so for this job. Would we be able to jump on a call in the next 24 hours? So just to kind of on a side tangent from that, I'm a big fan of using text message as a quick way to communicate, especially if I'm like, okay, I want to move into the second interview. I think this person's good. I use text messages all the time for reaching out, and I find it's more effective for reference calls than sending an email saying, hey, can we set up a call? It's just easier to be like, hey, Bob gave me your phone. Can we jump on a call really quick? And often, more times than not, like you're on a phone call within 3 hours.
So we've got 2 more questions here we're going to try to get through. So one, how should we get in touch with you if we are looking for new opportunities as a candidate?
Well, you can follow us on LinkedIn, like when we share jobs. For the most part, again, we're recruiting for our clients. We're not so much, because someone might be interested in a job, but we don't actually know like if they're an A player or not. If it's someone we've interviewed before and they're in our database and we really like them, they came second or third, we're going to reach out to them. But if we don't know who you are, the best thing to do is to follow us. And when you see a job that you like, reach out and, keep in touch. But again, we're really more focused on recruiting for our clients rather than, trying to find someone. Well, we don't do that. That's not what we do, essentially. So just follow us is the long answer that I meant to say in a short amount of time.
That's okay. Last question here. It looks like more on the employee side too. How should it appear on a resume for someone who has been promoted internally? So should it list its current title and disregard promotions, or should each position the person be listed with its dates?
Brett?
Yeah, I think that we just want to be able to, like, seeing promotions is always great because it's seeing internal growth. So again, I don't think this is a huge deal breaker in how it's formatted. I think as long as we can see that you're with a certain organization for an overall period of time. So usually, I guess the standard would be, it would say you're with ABC company, and then you are an HR manager for this amount of time. And then below it would say you're an HR coordinator for this amount of time. So it's all underneath that company, and we can just see the growth within that company and that organization. So as long as it's clearly laid out, we can understand that it was a promotion, and we can see the dates of each position, which I think is more important than overall working with the company, because we're able to kind of add those two together. So,
and I'll just add, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to, as a headhunter, I love seeing that. Like when I am engaging with someone that they've been with this company for 5 years and they've been promoted 3 times, I'm like, oh yeah, let's get this person, right? Because that's what you want. You want someone, going back to the question on how long in an organization, there's nothing better than finding someone who's been there for a while, or maybe, a couple years, but they've been promoted. That's exactly what we're after, because we know if they're being promoted, chances are that they're an A player and they're moving up the ranks quickly. So yeah, celebrate those promotions. That comes back to the executive summary in the resume, where it's just like, been promoted 3 times in the last 6 years. I've moved up from this to that, and my focus is this. It's like, perfect. I know who I'm dealing with. So yeah, definitely celebrate that.
Okay, Brett, that is all the questions that we have. So I'll let you kind of wrap up things. Perfect timing, awesome. Right at 3 o'clock.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Britt, for being the moderator. And we will be sending out the offer again. 50% discount on our commission. That's good until Friday, as long as you email us to book a call. And thanks again for joining in. Hopefully you learned some stuff on how to recruit smarter, not harder, whether you use us or you do it on your own. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.